Today is Monday, September 25th, 2017. Welcome to the End Times News Report. This is Jake Morphonios. I haven't talked about Syria in much detail the last few weeks because those videos tend to get me in trouble with YouTube, but I've been following the troop movements and battles that are going on in the oil-rich northeastern part of the nation. Let me tell you, things are really getting bad. So in this video, I'm going to talk with you about what is happening right now and why this is so very dangerous. The pieces on the geopolitical chessboard have been moved into such a pattern that direct warfare between the United States and Russia is becoming a very real likelihood if significant changes in course are not made, and made quickly. But that's something that I don't foresee happening. So I'll zoom into Syria, and you can see the geography that I'm talking about. The CIA masterminded the creation of ISIS with the operational support of the Israeli Mossad, the financial backing of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. The original goal was to overthrow the Assad government because the Syrians don't want to give up their country to the bankers and the oil corporations for exploitation. So the CIA, being the attack dog of the New World Order, they were funneling weapons to ISIS terrorists. After the cabal successfully overthrew the regime in Libya and killed Muammar Gaddafi, the mercenary forces in Libya, they traveled to Syria and up into Iraq to link up with the Al-Qaeda affiliates there, such as Jabhat al-Nusra. And the merging of these forces created ISIS. And then the CIA, operating out of Benghazi, Libya, where they had a CIA compound and a U.S. embassy. With the support of Hillary Clinton's State Department, what the CIA was doing was transporting the weapons that had been used by these Libyan mercenaries to overthrow Gaddafi. They were transporting the weapons out of Benghazi through the Mediterranean up to NATO bases in Turkey, where President Erdogan was enabling the CIA to route those weapons down to ISIS across the Turkish-Syrian border in the north. And ISIS was nearly successful in overthrowing the Assad regime, but then Vladimir Putin got involved, and Iran also increased its funding and its efforts. It was supporting the Lebanese Hezbollah paramilitary force. And so together, Russia, Iran, the Lebanese Hezbollah, and Syria, they worked together to repel the U.S.-backed ISIS and all of these myriad mercenary forces that they had put together, assembled together there in Syria. So seeing that defeat was inevitable, the United States decided to supplement its own air forces that were striking Syrian forces. They decided to supplement with U.S. ground troops, which was a very, very dangerous escalation. Well, so far, Russia and the United States have been largely fighting each other through proxies, but Russia has had the upper hand. They've been winning. ISIS has mostly fled out of Syria back into Iraq, and the last remaining ISIS forces are up here in the oil-rich part of Syria. ISIS and U.S. military troops have been shown just this week through Russian satellite footage to be traveling freely amidst one another's forces. And that's very shocking. Well, it's not shocking to me, but it's shocking to some people who are like, no, this isn't really happening. USA's not really working with ISIS. That's just, no. We've got the satellite footage that shows the American Humvees, they're in ISIS compounds. They're working together, at least in parts of the country. Now, the United States has apparently decided to draw a red line at the Euphrates River to dig in and not give up this oil territory that the CIA was using ISIS to take over back in the beginning of the conflict a handful of years ago. USA is not going to give up this territory. So on one side of the Euphrates, we have ISIS and the United States, and on the other side we have Russia, Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah. And they are converging toward each other in the region of Deir ez-Zor. This, folks, is a nightmare scenario. The two kings on the chessboard have finally met each other, and neither side seems intent on retreating. So let me explain the military strategy a little bit more thoroughly to you. I've reported in several past videos on this vast swath of oil-rich territory that ISIS has taken over. They've been pumping the oil, selling it on the black market, some of it to the corrupt family of Turkish President Recep Erdogan. And through this black market oil, ISIS was not only crippling the Syrian economy by taking their resources, but they were also bringing in tons of money for their own satanic operations, bringing in around $40 million per month. So what happened, though, is with Russian air support softening up the ISIS targets, the SAA, this is the official government army of Syria, the SSA, the Syrian Arab Army. They have been able to liberate most of the countryside on the western side of the Euphrates, and that includes the former ISIS stronghold at Deir ez-Zor. Deir ez-Zor was a critical garrison for the terrorist forces there. So that is where pressure on ISIS has been coming from on the western front. But there's also been pressure on ISIS from the north. And this is where things get really bizarre, at least at first glance, because we've had some major developments in just the last few weeks. I've talked a lot about the Kurds in previous videos. ISIS has been brutal toward the Kurds. Well, the Kurds are a vast group of ethnic minorities. They stretch from Turkey through Syria, Iraq, into Iran. Big section of Kurds. Lots of different Kurdish minorities. Well, the Kurds want a nation of their own. And they are and have been a source of rebellion throughout the various nations that they currently inhabit. Well, when Russia tipped the balance of power back to the Syrian government in its fight against ISIS, and it became clear that the CIA's plan to use ISIS was not going to work, a new strategy was devised. Really, though, it's not so much of a new strategy. More accurately, it is the refocus back onto a much older strategy, and that is to arm and support the Kurdish coalition and then use them as the U.S. proxy fighters. So what's been happening since Donald Trump took office is that the USA has been strengthening the Kurdish forces, which are called the SDF, or the Special Democratic Forces, the SDF. The USA has been using the SDF to push them down from the north into the oil-rich region of Deir ez-Zor to fill the vacuum that has been created by the retreat of ISIS forces. See, the CIA doesn't care who the proxies are. They'll use ISIS if it suits their agenda. But when it became clear that ISIS was going to go down, the USA put its backing behind the SDF to try and take over the oil fields to ensure that these oil fields don't fall back into the hands of the Syrian government. Remember, this brings in about $40 million per month. But there's more to it than just the money. It's about strategic control, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So the strategy has shifted. ISIS was serving the CIA agenda of overthrowing the entire government of Syria. But that's just no longer possible. Vladimir Putin stopped that. So the strategy is now to split Syria, to fragment it, to divide it into multiple states, giving this oil-rich territory in the northeast over to the Kurds. So if they can't take the entire country, the CIA is willing to settle for just taking the oil-rich region in the northeast and keeping it by using the Kurds, the SDF. Now the other, I'll just say this as a side note, the other major oil-rich region in Syria is the Golan Heights. That's already fully under control of Israel down in the south. Israel is now doing, it is so shameful, Israel is now doing what it always does when it wants to plant its flag somewhere that it doesn't own, claim the territory as its own. And that is, it is building illegal Israeli settlements in the Golan Heights. This is Syrian territory. The entire world knows it. But the Golan is also where it's not that they need it for their housing. That's not what they're doing. They're trying to stake their claim to the territory because it has so much oil in it. The Golan is where the sinister Genie Oil Corporation is pushing to start oil operations. Genie Oil is controlled by a group of Zionists and neocons led by people like Jacob Rothschild, Dick Cheney, and some other Jewish Zionists. And to guarantee that the Syrian government cannot retake its territory back from Israel in the Golan, I reported it, I gave this to you guys in an ETNR exclusive. I don't know of anyone else that reported this. The USA poured secretly, I had intel that gave me the information. The USA had poured thousands of U.S. troops a few months ago, military vehicles into Jordan, where they now sit prepared to rush into Syria through Syria's southern border to defend control of the oil in the Golan if necessary. But let's jump back up to Deir ez-Zor, where the USA is trying to split the region into a separate state for the Kurds, with the oil ultimately under the control of Western oil corporations. So up here we have a situation that is untenable. It's not going to work. The USA is going to try and hold on to the oil. It was willing to use the ISIS. It's willing to use the Kurds. It'll use whoever it needs to in order to hold on to that oil. The USA wants to control all of this area east of the Euphrates River. Okay, but Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, being a patriot in his own country, he is not going to tolerate a foreign power coming into his country, carving it up, and stealing his people's oil resources. And I don't know why anyone would find that objectionable. Would we here in the United States tolerate Mexico or Canada or someone across the ocean coming into America, slicing up our nation like it's a cake and taking the parts of it that it wants, leaving the rest to us? No, of course not. We are going to fight to hold our entire territory. That's what Bashar al-Assad is doing. So Syria is going to keep fighting. And they've got powerful allies on their side, with support continuing to pour in. They are getting support from the Russians in Moscow. They are getting support from Hezbollah coming out of Beirut, Lebanon. And they've got support from the Iranians in Tehran. Now, another major ISIS stronghold has been up here, further north in the city of Raqqa. The Syrian army has been pounding ISIS in Raqqa. And up until this week, the Kurdish SDF has also been fighting ISIS in Raqqa. They have been allied with Syria against ISIS in Raqqa. But this past week, the USA decided to turn the Kurds against Syria. And they have sent the Kurds out of Raqqa, sent them to go take control of the oil fields in Deir ez-Zor. So in response, the Syrian army has had to largely disengage from its fighting ISIS in Raqqa to try and get over to the region of Deir ez-Zor before the SDF could get there. And so while you've got the Kurdish SDF racing to the oil region eastward along the northern side of the Euphrates, the Syrian army has had to cross over the Euphrates and rush to the region along the south of the Euphrates. Unfortunately, the SDF got there first. Now, some of the sources that are reporting from Syria that have been feeding me information say that the U.S.-backed SDF have been able to capture oil fields. They've taken Tabia oil field. They've taken the oil fields in Al-Isba, both of which are in the northwestern countryside. Now, if that intel turns out to be correct. I haven't seen confirmation of this anywhere else yet. I think it's correct. The source has always given me good intel in the past. If this turns out to be right, what that means is that the United States has taken control of over half of Syria's oil reserves. It also means that the U.S.-backed forces have the Russian-backed forces blocked on the eastern front so that they can't cross over the Euphrates there. This is a huge setback for Syria and for Russia. I just can't express how backstabbingly nefarious the United States has been. Up until this point, the Kurdish SDF has been an ally of Syria. It's been helping to fight against ISIS. But the USA has positioned the Kurds in direct opposition to the Syrian and Russian forces. The SDF has gone from being an ally of Syria to its enemy. The SDF has treacherously claimed the eastern flank of the nation in a U.S.-backed attempt to carve that region out of Syria to form its own Kurdish territory. Now, I am not surprised by this move. I don't know that Russia and Syria is really surprised by it either. I have been reporting on this since 2002, on the CIA's manipulation of the Kurdish population. The CIA has, for many years now, been stoking the separatist ambitions of the Kurds. It was the Kurds in Iraq that the CIA was using back in the early 2000s, actually late 1990s, early 2000s, to try to split Iraq apart. You guys may have heard the war propaganda that the Bush administration was using, saying, oh, Saddam Hussein has used chemical weapons, he has gassed his own people. Well, that's technically right, because the Kurds were part of Iraq. But what the Bush administration left out of that propaganda is that it was the CIA pushing the Kurds in Iraq to separate and take control of the northern part of Iraq. So yes, Saddam Hussein attacked them. Yes, he used the chemical weapons that the United States gave to him back during the Iran-Iraq war against the Kurds. But he didn't really use it against his own people, if you think of it as the Kurds being separatists trying to overthrow the rule of the Iraqi regime. So that's the truth of it. That's what propaganda is. Propaganda is taking a seed of truth and twisting it to mean something other than what the truth is. So I'm not surprised by this move in Syria, but it is still a significant development, and Russia knows it. In fact, Russia has already responded. The Russian Defense Ministry spokesman, Major General Igor Konashenkov, he issued a firm warning to the USA. He said that Russia is going to retaliate. Russia itself, they're not going to do this through the Syrian army. Russia itself will retaliate against the U.S. forces, the U.S.-backed forces, if the SDF attacks the Syrian army again. If they do any more shelling against the Syrian army, Russia's going to retaliate. So we now have the USA and its allies on one side of the Euphrates River. They're in control of Syria's oil fields, with Russia and its allies on the other side of the Euphrates River, seeking to regain control of the oil fields. On the Russian side, we've got the 5th Assault Corps, ISIS hunters, they went in and they consolidated control over the Kusham village, put it back under control of the Syrian government. The Russian-Syrian forces targeted this particular village because controlling this village blocks a key road that links the area that is now held by the SDF to another section of oil fields, which are called the Omar oil fields. Right? So this is a strategically smart move. Well, the USA-backed forces may have the upper hand at the moment, but Syria can't rebuild its war-torn country without the revenues generated from this oil-rich region of its own country. So Assad is not going to give up. And so that puts Syria and Russia in this head-on collision course with the United States and its proxies. We are headed to war. Now, we're already in proxy war. And there have been a few instances of direct exchange of fire between U.S. and Russian forces, but it's about to get worse. Let's talk about Donald Trump. Trump has said repeatedly during the campaign that the United States had no business in Syria. And so when he bombed Syria after the false flag gas attack, his supporters were naturally very angry at this. But that's only part of what Donald Trump said on the campaign trail. Yes, he did say that the U.S. has no business in Syria, but that's only part of it. That's just the part that Trump supporters were willing to listen to. What they were not willing to listen to, because, well, let's face it, Trump supporters have selective hearing. Most people who are diehard loyalists of any particular candidate, most people have selective hearing. So Trump said also, though, that he would be interested in going into Syria if it meant that the United States could take Syria's oil. He said this repeatedly. And folks, that is exactly what Donald Trump is doing. This is not only incredibly un-American, but it is also un-Christian. He is trying to steal another nation's oil for pure, unadulterated greed. He is spilling the blood of innocent civilians for money. So shame on any of you who support Donald Trump's warmongering for oil. He's risking World War III to pursue this unbridled greed. This is not business. This is sinfulness. Thank God that Vladimir Putin doesn't have the wild temperament of Donald Trump, or we'd probably already be in that world war. But Putin is not going to give up on this. And let me explain why Russia is going to continue to defend Syria. You may be wondering, why is Russia there? We know USA's after the oil. Why is Russia there? Well, just like America does around the world, Russia invests money into other countries where there is mutual gain possible. That's called capitalism. So Russia has contracted with Iran, with Syria, to cooperate together on plans to sell oil. A lot of Americans don't realize this, but more than half of Russia's gross domestic product is based on oil sales. And with the USA's harsh economic war against Russia the last couple of years, Russia absolutely has to be able to sell its oil and its gas to survive economically. So what the United States has done in Syria, it screws up those plans. So for the sake of its own national survival, Russia must protect its financial investments in Syria and Iran. The territory in Syria east of Deir ez-Zor is part of an overland route. It connects Beirut to Damascus, to Baghdad, to Tehran. And this is called the Arab Superhighway. If the USA takes this territory away from Syria, then it interrupts that superhighway. It screws up the plans that Russia, Iran, and Syria have been working on for years. So Russia will go to war with the United States over this. No questions. It has to. There is no other choice if the United States will not release its hold on the territory. And so, after a bloody 6 years of warfare in Syria, warfare that the United States initiated during the Obama-Hillary years, this battle has now culminated under Donald Trump. And if you don't believe that this war for oil was part of Trump's plan all along, ask yourself, why is it that he chose Exxon CEO Rex Tillerson to fill the job of Secretary of State, the very same position that Hillary held when she was waging a war for oil on behalf of her puppet masters? Folks, I am not exaggerating when I say that World War III could begin on the banks of the Euphrates River in Syria. And for those familiar with end times prophecies, Revelation chapter 9 verses 13 through 16 might come to mind. The sixth angel sounded his trumpet, and I heard a voice coming from the four horns of the golden altar that is before God. It is said to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, "Release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates." And the four angels who had been kept ready for this very hour and day and month and year were released to kill a third of mankind. The number of the mounted troops was twice 10,000 times 10,000. I heard their number. For the End Times News Report, I'm Jake Morphonios.